Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Stories from the week ending November 11, 2023. Yes, Veterans Day. We begin with Compliance Week, reporting from Kyle Brasseur that GE Aerospace will pay $9.4 million in a DOJ false claims case. The company admitted that its Massachusetts-based manufacturing plant occasionally did not conduct required parts inspections and sold engines containing parts that did not meet certain specifications of U.S. military contracts. The activities occurred between July 2012 and December 2019. This is $5.4 million of this fine was restitution, according to the settlement agreement. Next up, from the Financial Times, a very interesting story about why you should have a robust ESG and sustainability program. A key reason: workers will accept lower pay at environmentally sustainable firms. Indeed, skilled staff is willing to work harder and longer for up to 15% less that they can earn at other jobs. The article reports this is from lawyers to receptionists to HR to IT. And this comes from a study of academics in Europe who uncovered what they have called the sustainability wage gap. So, another reason for having robust ESG and sustainability, you can hire workers for less. Next up, from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal, David Smagala reporting that the U.S. government, or rather the U.K. government, has sanctioned 29 individuals and entities operating and supporting Russia's gold and oil sectors in an effort to cut off revenue streams funding the war in Ukraine. The entities sanctioned Wednesday include Nord Gold and Highland Gold Mining, two of the largest producers of Russian gold, and an Emirates-based network the UK said had channeled more than $300 million in gold revenue to Russia. So just as Russia develops new revenue streams, more sanctions are put in place to shut them down. Next up, from Reuters, a story that government-backed hackers tried to plant spyware on the NSO group, made by the NSO group on the iPhone of an Indian journalist working on an organized crime and corruption project. The analysis of the journalist's phone showed infiltration was made back in August, and he was among a series of people who received alerts from Apple warning them they had been targeted by state-sponsored hackers. Next up, our second story of three from the Financial Times, Adam Neumann is back in the news as WeWork files for bankruptcy. Yes, the once high-flying and innovative office-sharing company has finally completely crashed to earth. Who stands to gain the most? Turns out it's Adam Neumann because of the incredible exit package he got when he left. Our third and final FT story is about the UK watchdog, the Information Commissioner's Office, which handles data privacy and data protection in the United Kingdom, has issued a rare apology, specifically to former NatWest chief Alison Rose for suggesting she breached the law when she spoke to journalists about the closure of Nigel Farage's bank account. After that comment by the ICO, she was forced out as CEO or chief of NatWest. So in terms of too little, too late, yeah, it's way down the road. On the other hand, at least there was an apology issued. The ICO said it regretted not giving Rose the opportunity to comment on its findings. And the regulator said it had not investigated Rose's actions, but that the probe had focused on NatWest. Rose was forced to resign after the comments by the ICO. Next up, a very interesting compliance story that on first blush may not appear so. In a World Cup cricket match, you have to, once you go into the batter's box, be ready to go in 2 minutes. Well, one team's batter had an issue with his snapping his helmet, and he couldn't get it done because the snap was broken, and he exceeded the 2 minutes. The other manager raised the issue, and he was disallowed. So the significance for compliance is compliance always takes a second seat to safety issues. And this to me was a perfect example. The batter couldn't snap his helmet, obviously a safety concern. The rule said you have to be ready to go within 120 seconds. If that happens, the umpire or referee should have overruled that internal control that you have to bat in 120 seconds and allowed the batter to get a helmet that safely protected him. So always remember, even with written policies and procedures, if there is a safety issue which is arisen, safety is number one in every company or sport. And I thought this was a great example from the world of cricket to help us recall that. Next up, in a very interesting case reported by LatinLawyer, the U.S. Supreme Court has declined to review a PdVSA bribery case. Now, this was not a case where individuals were charged for receiving bribes or companies were charged for bribing PdVSA employees, but PdVSA created a litigation trust to represent itself and then tried to sue a slew of oil traders, bankers, and individuals for engaging in bribery in exchange for inside information, fixed prices, and bid rigging. Sorry about that. The clear import here is that as perhaps the world's most corrupt company, certainly the world's most corrupt national energy company, PdVSA really has no basis to bring claims against those by claiming victimhood status. Interestingly, in the United States, other companies are able to claim they're the victim, and you might think of Petrobras as a clear example of this, yet courts declined this putative litigation trust and required or dismissed PdVSA's claim to seek back money. Sometimes the law actually gets it right, and I think this was one of them, because can you imagine the corruption if PdVSA started getting back the billions that people bribed its employees with? And finally, from The Guardian, Portugal's socialist Prime Minister Antonio Costa has resigned after prosecutors examining alleged corruption involving lithium and green hydrogen deals announced that he personally was under investigation, and police searched dozens of addresses, including his official residence and the environment and infrastructure industry. So a stunning resignation and revelation from the Portugal corruption investigation. We typically don't get corruption stories out of Portugal, but we've had now two. Obviously, the first one was the massive company Altice, and now the Portuguese Prime Minister. Thanks for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. As I mentioned in a prior episode, this is the one request I've received most often from podcast listeners of the Daily Compliance News to put together a summary at week's end so that every compliance professional can catch up on the news quite quickly. So I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review to this new podcast addition to the Compliance Podcast Network family, 10 for 10. If you've got an idea for a podcast, I'd love to hear from you. I start many shows based upon ideas from listeners. So give me a shout. You can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. 10 for 10 is a proud member of the Compliance Podcast Network.